Good morning, everybody. Nice to have you all with us today. Uh, my name is Patrick Malloy. I am a principal with the Climate Aligned Industries program here at RMI, and I lead our work on ammonia, fertilizers, and industrial infrastructure. And I have the great pleasure today to welcome you all to this webinar on growing the green fertilizer market, and in particular focusing on the work that the team has been doing in Minnesota over the last year. And also we have the great pleasure to bring an esteemed group of panelists together to speak from various perspectives on how making this market move from a prospective mechanism for deep decarbonization to something that is real, tangible, commercially viable, and consequential in benefiting the agriculture sector in North America. So to begin with, I'd like to just give a little bit of an overview of what we're going to do today. So first, I will make some introductions. We'll go through some of the kind of overview and objectives of the work that was been done and the roadmap insights. And then we will move to a panel discussion and get the perspectives of our esteemed panelists on the various areas of opportunity and challenge in this market. And lastly, if we have time, we will deal with some Q&A. So save your questions, pop them into the chat, and we'll try and get to them as we go through the webinar today. So with that, maybe just to begin, if we can jump to the next slide. I think the first thing I'd like to just generally flag is that, ammonia as a key component to nitrogenous fertilizer production is certainly heavily reliant on natural gas feedstock and is a very, very consequential global GHG emission profile. It can emit as much as 2.3 tons of CO2 per ton of ammonia produced today. But also we've seen huge volatility in these natural gas prices over the last year after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, to the point where we've seen pricing in some parts of the Midwest as high as $1,600 a ton. As such, we've focused this work on distributed green ammonia production in Minnesota, looking at the localized potential for DGA and how that can act as a hedge against these fertilizer price volatility aspects, and also to some degree the supply chain disruptions that may emerge as we've seen over the last year with some changes in the kind of water levels within the Mississippi. This is a very significant kind of area of work, but also, as we look at the challenges with natural gas prices at the moment and the logistics costs, we believe that there's a pathway for competitive production of decarbonized and green ammonia in these markets, and also that there is a very real reason for optimism for this space going forward beyond even just the immediate challenges that we see. Specifically, we believe that Minnesota is a leading example given the efforts that have gone on in the state, and we're very, very pleased to be able to bring some panelists together who can speak to that direct effort, as well as some folks in the commercial effort and the commercial space of deploying and developing projects. And also, very clearly, we have an opportunity to discuss some of the emerging areas in space where we can get Bryce's perspective from breakthrough to understand some of the opportunity space. So maybe if we can just click back to the other slide, I'll do a very quick introduction of everybody. So first we will have Ariel Kagan from the Minnesota Farmers Union, Bryce Hampel from Breakthrough Energy, Dan Holmes from Atlas Agro, Hiro Iwanaga from Talos Renewables, Paul Beamer from the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. So with that, that's my hard work out of the way for today. I get to pass the baton to these fine folks. So maybe with that, Ariel, if I could ask you to introduce yourself, but also just to ask you, what's one aspect that you're most excited about in this space, and what is the key challenge we need to solve? And for those of you who are following on from Ariel, you get to the heads up on the questions. So Ariel, you get to set the bar on what this is.
Sounds great. Fantastic. Well, thank you. And it's really great to be part of this conversation. Minnesota Farmers Union is a grassroots member-based organization that represents family farmers across the state of Minnesota. We're a general farm organization. We work on policy and advocacy at the Capitol in St. Paul, and we have a lot of other programs as well. I'm really privileged to lead our Climate and Working Lands program, which is a fairly new program area at the Minnesota Farmers Union that really comes out of our members' grassroots process and identifying climate resilience as a key priority for us as an organization to be working on. Green ammonia is something that our members are really excited about and that we're enthusiastic about in terms of what's possible here in the state and what it means for family farmers. Farmers use ammonia or urea or nitrogen fertilizer as a key farm input, and it's expensive. It's across the state, the estimates are something like $500 million to $1 billion of fertilizer is purchased for farms every year, and that money leaves our state. We have no fertilizer production in the state of Minnesota, and it goes to multinational companies. Fertilizer is one of the more concentrated industries in the world. It's very highly consolidated, and those multinational companies are based outside of Minnesota. They're producing fertilizer in other parts of the world, and so that's just input costs that are necessary, but that's leaving our economy. So the reason that we're excited about green ammonia as a potential for our state is for that reason, that we see big potential for farmers to have locally produced and locally owned fertilizer. And so something we've been working on closely with the University of Minnesota at the West Central Research and Outreach Station, which we call West Rock, is looking at how we can use the cooperative model that has a long history here in Minnesota in agriculture and in other sectors to make it so that this is not just locally available, but also locally owned, and that this can actually become not just something that farmers spend money on, but that they're benefiting from as well and contributes to the farm economy. The other thing that I'll just say we're excited about is that there's an increasing interest in the market for low carbon intensity feedstocks, especially in the fuel market for biofuels, but across the board for consumer packaged good products and all sorts of different things. And fertilizer is a large part of the carbon intensity of crops. And so if we can have this locally produced, cooperatively owned, low carbon intensity fertilizer, that adds value on a number of fronts to farmers in the state of Minnesota. So that's something that we're very excited about, and I will pass it on to probably Bryce is next in the alphabet.
Thanks, Sarah. Bryce, over to you.
Yes, good morning. Bryce, agriculture portfolio at the U.S. Policy and Advocacy team here at Breakthrough Energy. Little bit of background on Breakthrough. We are a global network of climate leaders committed to accelerating the development and deployment of technology to help lower emissions in what we call the 5 grand challenges, which are manufacturing, electricity, transportation, buildings, and then agriculture, which we're talking about today. I'll just kind of piggyback off of Ariel as somebody who grew up on a family farm in the southeast corner of North Dakota, in the Corn Belt there. It's exciting to think that we can bring opportunity to local farmers, local producers, help revive rural America and the development there by training a workforce that could potentially take advantage of these new solutions for producing fertilizer and allowing producers to be a part of lowering emissions in the sector at the same time providing more opportunity for them. So I'll just kind of leave it at that. That's what I'm most excited about.
Thanks, Bryce. Dan, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. My name is Dan Holmes. I lead the North American team for Atlas Agro. We're a Swiss fertilizer company building green fertilizer projects around the world. Our most advanced project is in Washington State, the Pacific Green Fertilizer Plant. We recently finished our FEED study and recently received our environmental permits, both at the state level of SEPA and the national level, the NEPA permit. I'm working with Department of Energy. There was an announcement yesterday on the Pacific Northwest Hydrogen Hub, and also received some funding from USDA under their fertilizer production expansion program. So if anyone's curious about that project, yesterday we updated the website with some new renderings, which are very cool, based on the actual engineered 3D model. There's even a video walkthrough you can go look at. So what I'm excited about is how much progress has been made, I think both publicly and privately over the last months. It wasn't always inevitable that we would see this shift, but it seems to be more and more so. Food companies are starting to acknowledge that these aggressive or ambitious or just helpful 2030 targets that they've committed to may not be achievable with the tools that they have. And so bringing new tools to the food companies that are trying to do their best, I think is going to be really critical. And nitrogen fertilizer is something that we're not going to hit net zero without, and probably not hit even these 2030 goals without. So really excited to see that progress that's happening all over this industry.
Thanks, Dan. Hero, over to
Hero.
you.
Oh, thanks. So I'm the co-founder and CEO of Talus. We build distributed modular, rapidly deployable green ammonia systems. We deployed the first one under commercial service last year. We don't sell our systems. We own them. We hold them on our balance sheet, and we sign long-term fixed price contracts for ammonia, 10 to 15 year long contracts. We're deploying 78 sites across the US. The first 3 sites will come online this summer. I think our Boone site in Iowa will be online in the next couple of weeks here. And then the next few sites immediately after. We fund our systems only with commercial capital, just a lot faster. So it allows us to deploy systems immediately. And over the next 12 months, we will deploy another 20 to 25 sites in the US. Just for a little bit more history, the origin of Talus is really to build these rapidly deployable modular green ammonia systems to lower the cost of fertilizer, make it more reliable, make it more sustainable in the developing world, in Africa, where access to fertilizer is either limited, or certainly limited, or where farmers pay double or triple for fertilizer as a farmer in the United States. And so that was the origin of our work. Build these rapidly deployable systems that can run on behind the meter renewable systems, make them cheaper. You know, in Africa, we're 30% cheaper than imported fertilizers. In the United States, supported by the green hydrogen tax credits, we are 20 to 30% cheaper than the long-term average of ammonia prices in the Corn Belt. Well, actually, in all the states we operate. And yeah, to me, what I'm excited about is, training's great, and sustainability is obviously important. We serve American farmers by giving them cheaper fertilizer, and I think the only thing they care about is we actually can deliver reliable fertilizer cheaper than their imported or commodity products.
Thanks, Hero. Paul, over to you.
Hi, good morning. Paul Beamer here with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. I sit inside the Energy and Environment Division, and I'm the Bioeconomy Program Manager. So I help to carry out legislatively appropriated funds to develop programs that create incentives for production or consumption of bio-based goods. Minnesota is a known leader in agriculture and energy innovation, and was actually one of the first states to have an ethanol blending mandate, which the state of Minnesota provided significant financial support to the nascent biofuels industry in the early 1990s. And everything is such a circular economy within agriculture. I would say that one thing I'm most excited about is the recent passing of the Inflation Reduction Act, which maybe isn't so recent now, but continues to kind of unfold. And I think it's really exciting that Minnesota gets to help participate and accelerate, additional, energy initiatives and decarbonization efforts within the agricultural industry, ultimately supporting our rural communities and our farmers.
Thanks all. So now we get to the point where I get to ask you questions and learn more. Hopefully this will be of interest to our attendees, but maybe just to start with Hero and Dan, I think, obviously you both are involved in the commercial effort here to bring and deliver green ammonia. I think the first question that many people may have is, what exactly is green ammonia and how it's different from conventional ammonia? But also, what is the opportunity for green ammonia versus that conventional market? So who would like to kick us off, Hero or Dan?
I think that's a better Hero question.
Oh, sure. Well, I would have said, Dan, you probably have even more knowledge, but
Well, I can explain why, yeah, we're not focused on green ammonia, and instead it's derivatives. So maybe if you start.
Yeah, so ammonia, most people I'm sure are aware, second most produced chemical in the world, 80% of which is used for fertilizer, 20% for industrial uses. It is a critical raw material that feeds the world, depending on how you count, 7 to the 8 billion people. It is a critical raw material that has two problems. One is we produce it in giant centralized plants, the largest producers of which are China and Russia. The United States produces a fair amount also, but we still import a decent chunk of that. So that's one problem. The second problem is it's order of magnitude 2% of global carbon emissions by itself. And so if you can locally produce ammonia, let's ignore the green part. If you can locally produce ammonia, you help secure America's food supply. You stabilize the price of it. Obviously, farmers are well aware of that, or the price volatility of fertilizers over the last few years. So you can guarantee its supply. You can make it more sustainable. And then in terms of ammonia, and I guess I'll kick that over to Dan. Ammonia is our cheapest source of nitrogen, right, for farms. And so in the Corn Belt and with a bunch of large farms, ammonia is still a preferred source of nitrogen fertilizer because they can use it in precision agriculture and lower their cost of nitrogen in the ground. But Dan, maybe you can talk about the upgrades of ammonia to others.
Yeah, sure. So ammonia is certainly very popular in the US and Canada. In a lot of other countries, it's not a common practice to use ammonia in the soil. There are reasons why farmers would want to use it. Some logistics reasons. A lot of farmers, put it in the ground when the ground is cold early, when their tractors are free. These kind of logistical elements. I know Minnesota's passed some laws limiting when farmers can do that, because the earlier you do it, the more chances you have for loss to the environment, other elements. But the primary reason it gets used the most is because it's cheap, right? And this is, it's a globally traded commodity. It's 82% nitrogen, so it's very dense, which means that when you're shipping a product around the world, it's very effective to ship. And so these are all good reasons to use ammonia. But when we take a step back and we look at, the system from a clean sheet of paper, and we say, okay, if you no longer have the cheapness of it, right? Green ammonia is more expensive, right? Hero, I think, might disagree. He's got a way to do it less expensively, but for the most part, if we assume green ammonia is more expensive, then we don't look at ammonia use the same way. And we also look at ways that we can improve the on-field emissions profile of the way we use fertilizers in a precision agriculture kind of way. I think Minnesota has also led on some legislation, or attempted to at least, around things like plastic coatings on urea that are meant to help with on-field emissions, but end up having other downsides. And so when we take a step back and we look at the types of fertilizers that are most efficient, in this case, it's nitrate-based fertilizers, which is only around 2% of US fertilizers are nitrate fertilizers. In Europe, it's more like 40%. But using nitrate fertilizers, you can get a lot of these on-field emissions reductions benefits at the same time. And so when you look at it as a system of local production, new fertilizers, new tools for farmers, it has to be cost competitive. But we have this opportunity to do all these things. Switching costs are fairly straightforward. If you're a urea or UAN user, if you're a current ammonia user, changing to granular and liquid fertilizers is a little more of a switching cost. But yeah, we view this as a chance to look at what things should look like in 50 years and kind of head in that direction.
Thank you both. And maybe just a quick follow on, given the kind of perspectives that you both shared and the kind of the positional plays in the market. I suppose at a high level, what are those primary barriers for adoption, whether it be of green ammonia directly where it's used versus green ammonia as a feedstock for those derivative fertilizers? What's the adoption challenge that we face? Is it purely cost, or are those just observational kind of use costs profiles for farmers the primary drivers?
I'll start there. So yeah, I think it's 98% cost. There's reliability, right? We have deployed our first few systems. We will deploy another 15 systems in the first half of 25. And I think there we start to build more credibility to be able to show people that we can do what we say we'll do. Right. That's obviously really important. But fundamentally, ammonia is, as Dan mentioned, it's a globally traded commodity. It's like most produced chemical in the world. Green ammonia is chemically no different than any other ammonia. It's just we can produce it in a renewable, environmentally sustainable fashion. And with federal tax credits, be cheaper than normal commodity ammonia. Not cheaper without those tax credits, to be clear. But I think when we think about green ammonia, the adoption, right? Our ammonia, we would argue in the locations we're deploying it, ours are cheaper. It's on-site and more reliable. We're displacing a potentially 10,000 kilometer long supply chain. It happens to be carbon free. And so in those cases, we have no adoption challenges. We have $1.5 billion of systems that we have LOIs for now that we're deploying. And so I think it's just cost. And the only reason we can be competitive in the United States is because of the hydrogen manufacturing tax credit.
And I would add to that, we have an extra complication in building larger scale systems, and that's project finance. And so you have the absolute cost, but I also, through project finance, have to make some assumptions. The banks are conservative. They'll make me assume that future fertilizer prices are going to be historically low forever, right? Even if I can operate comfortably, say at 10-year average costs, these aren't the assumptions I get to make as I, work through project finance. And so from a policymaker standpoint, government standpoint, I certainly think there's things that can be done around, whether it's cost for difference or supportive through that project finance process when the big companies aren't the ones making this transition, right? It kind of falls on the shoulders of new small companies. But then at the same time, we're asked to, shoulder more burden through the process than some others. So being cost competitive, number one, but then even being able to predict those costs, not in a worst case model going forward, is also important.
Thank you both. Bryce, this is where we get to pull you in and, given the focus on cost and cost being a primary challenge, but also some of those other kind of dynamics in the marketplace. I think the first question we have to ask is, how is Breakthrough supporting some of the technological advancements in the green fertilizers and ammonia space?
Yeah, so try not to get too long-winded here, but I think first off, understanding the diversity of U.S. agriculture and the fact that every region is different, every plot of land is different, every landowner deploys different practices in a largely voluntary system. So we don't see this as a way of, regulating our way into certain practices, certain technologies. It's really about building a market to make these products competitive. And so what we have done is bring together, a lot of what we do is doing convenings, bridging gaps between stakeholders. And so, when we're talking about making sure that the options being provided are low emissions alternatives to the conventional models, whether that be through microbial solutions, whether that be through the clean production of synthetics, we really have been trying to engage academic institutions who demonstrate research, technology applications of ammonia and energy generations, and those involved in the rural and economic development studies. We've been engaging through our partners at the Beneficial Electrification League, engaging cooperatives as we see being a very successful model in the offtake and deployment. As well as government entities, so that are focused on the regional hydrogen hubs and regional developments. We would love to see more frameworks like that of the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, who Minnesota as a whole has set some pretty pretty good standards for lowering emissions writ large, and that's going to include the fertilizer industry. So seeing them engage the way they do, and as well as states that kind of lean the other way. My home state of North Dakota, the legislature has provided loans to help utilize renewable sources for the production of green ammonia. The renewable sources are coming from wind energy in my home county of Lemoore, and so helping facilitate those and bridging the gaps and really getting the NGOs together to engage different stakeholders to build out roadmaps. We're kind of in the beginning of this here at Breakthrough Energy and building a foundation and building a bevy of smart policy solutions using insights from industry is really what we're trying to do.
So maybe as a follow on, given the breadth of kind of areas of focus, I have to ask the technology question, right? In the breakthrough kind of area or kind of technology pathway kind of area, are there any particularly exciting advancements that you're seeing with regard to green fertilizers, or is it more of this kind of just general ecosystem collaboration?
Yeah, a lot of interesting developments. So with Breakthrough Energy, the way it's structured, we look at viable technology. We help create an environment that will allow commercial success. And so kind of help them through this chain of development, scaling, and deploying. Under that, our U.S. policy and advocacy team really works to try and work with these technologies and figure out which are the most viable and which ones can be the most competitive. We're seeing some really exciting developments in the microbial space, but again, as I had mentioned with the diversity of American agriculture, that doesn't always work for everyone. And so we need to provide options for them, which will include the Haber-Bosch using green hydrogen, the photocatalysis technologies out there. And so it's less about picking a specific technology as it is to create a market for those technologies to thrive. So this is a very interesting space that people are looking at. And I think given the global upheaval of the fertilizer supply chain and market, more people are looking at this and governments are looking at this more critically and more urgently than they used to. So I think we're at the beginning stages of a lot of this, and it'll be all about really engaging farmers in educating them to deploying this types of technology.
Thanks, Bryce. Paul and Ariel, moving to you. I suppose Minnesota has been a leader in this space, and as much as we are early in this kind of evolution, I suppose how is Minnesota leading the development and adoption of green fertilizers? Whoever would like to kick us off.
I'll let Ariel go first.
Well, we have an incredible team at the University of Minnesota West Central Research and Outreach Station, and they have been working on this since, I think, 2002. So Mike Reese is a leader in this. He's done a ton of work trying to figure out how to actually make green ammonia with renewable energy in Morris, Minnesota, which if you don't know where that is, it's worth Googling. It's right out on the western edge. Lots of wind energy. I don't know, Bryce, my folks live up on the Minnesota side of the North Dakota border, and there's a joke that when you leave, you fall over because you're so used to pushing against the wind. So lots of wind.
No shortage of wind there.
Yeah, exactly. And so we at Farmers Union certainly look to our colleagues at Morris to, figure out the technology and how this is going to work. They've done a lot of great work on the economics of production of green ammonia. And so just in the legislative session last year, we were able to work with a coalition of partners, including ag cooperatives, ethanol companies, folks at the research center, energy NGOs, to advocate for a grant program that Paul can talk about the current status of, but we ended up with a $7 million appropriation from the legislature in Minnesota to fund farmer cooperatives to buy equity shares in green ammonia production facilities. And we see this as really important because I think, as Dan mentioned, financing for these facilities is very challenging. And we want to make sure that farmers have have an equity stake in this key input in our region. That grant program is under development, and we're very eager to get it out in the world. I think it's interesting too, because in that process, we worked together in that stakeholder group and with our legislative champions to define green ammonia in Minnesota, and to think about how we could really deploy it in a way that is, environmentally responsible with best management practices. So I think that's very exciting. The National Renewable Energy Labs has also done quite a lot of work thinking about green ammonia as and fertilizer as sort of the stepping ladder up to a variety of other sectors that are important to the state. So mining and heavy industry, marine fuel, things that are very much outside of my sphere of expertise. But I think there's a real understanding that Minnesota is uniquely positioned because of our geology and our resources and our industries to make the most of this opportunity. And we have a number of legislative champions who see this as a key sector that we can develop in Minnesota that will benefit across the board. So, legislative session it starts in January, which feels like just around the corner, and we'll continue to work on that with our partners. And Paul, if you want to follow up with anything I missed or add to.
Yeah, thank you. Well, as Ariel mentioned, there's been historically a lot of great innovation and partnerships from research that comes out of the University of Minnesota. We have a number of satellite campuses from the north all the way to the south. And just typically we have a lot of great research that's coming out of that really helps to kind of incentivize and encourage industry to come to Minnesota, looking at all of our wonderful resources. And as I mentioned earlier, Minnesota historically has supported the bioeconomy through a number of different initiatives and continues to do so. And I think some of the larger barriers beyond that we've already mentioned here, such as financial, continues to be just renewable energy projects in general. Minnesota is doing pretty well in the renewable energy space. Overall, we've got, almost half of our power is coming from renewable energy sources with really just a need to develop more projects and have it sort of positioned well such that projects like green ammonia can come and really take advantage of these federal tax programs that we've also mentioned that a lot of folks are still kind of waiting for these rules to come out. But Minnesota is ranked number 4 in corn production, and that accounts for roughly 10% of the ammonia production nationally. So again, beyond the things that we've sort of discussed earlier, a lot of our ammonia manufacturing is done in the South. And so by having localized production, I think we can do a lot to continuously decarbonize our efforts. And as Ariel mentioned, we are developing an RFP. A lot of folks want to know when that's going to be available. As such, we want to make sure that we are doing as much de-risking as possible. I noticed one of the questions came up that what are some of the concerns that cooperatives have in general across the board, and much of that comes back to just de-risking. Luckily, we've got a couple experts on here working with green ammonia who have demonstrated that this is not only possible, but it's feasible. And so having proven technology elsewhere can really help to incentivize Minnesota to try and adopt this as well. And I think we will be successful. Like all things worth doing, it will take time, and we want to make sure that we do this right. So ultimately, we are very excited about this perspective.
So maybe as a quick follow on, Minnesota, as we mentioned, is a leader. You've both spoken to some of the opportunity space and the centralization of that kind of use profile as well within the state. I suppose, what else makes Minnesota an ideal location for these first projects that is enabling kind of them to come to the fore so quickly in what is still an emergent space?
If I may just briefly, and then I'll let Ariel go. Well, I mean, if you ask any Minnesotan, they're going to tell you it's a great state to live in. Ultimately, it's a very beautiful state with a lot of progressive ideals in terms of environmental conservation, in terms of decarbonization efforts. We are very friendly towards the biofuel industry. We'd like to see decarbonization efforts in every way, shape, and possible. So, we see green ammonia additionally beyond just fertilizer use, again, being the 4th largest producer of corn in the U.S. We produce a variety of crops that can also utilize and leverage green ammonia, from small grains. I mean, we produce sugar beets to sunflowers to barley, wheat, rye, oats, sorghum, hemp. I mean, there is a whole spectrum of crops that are a little atypical outside of the particular corn belt, depending on who you ask. North Dakota is slowly becoming into that, North Dakota has historically also been a very friendly partnering state as far as grain trading. There's a number of ethanol facilities that are coming online who are all looking to develop SAF or sustainable aviation fuel. Minnesota also has passed a sustainable aviation fuel tax credit, thanks to my supervisor, Megan Lennon. So there's a lot of industries that are interested in coming to Minnesota to produce SAF, renewable diesel, and a number of other fuels that, being a part of the hydrogen hub with the Dakotas. So ultimately, we see green ammonia as really a nice way to fit into all of these other economies to help just continuously decarbonize, be a leader in providing renewable energy, and ultimately just trying to draw world-class, I would say leadership in innovation spaces. And yeah, maybe Ariel has a little bit more to add on how wonderful Minnesota is.
Well, couldn't agree more. I always like to say Minnesota's above average. So we've got all those great things going for us. I think our farmers in the state are incredibly engaged in what's happening. I'm always sort of amazed going out to visit farms and sitting in shops and talking about the details of the hydrogen tax credit and, what is 45Z going to mean for ethanol plants. And so folks are engaged. Minnesota Farmers Union is one organization. We have a variety of strong farm organizations in the state that are all working on these issues and are proactive on issues around renewable energy and implementation of IRA programs. I think farmers, I would say it's Minnesota, but it's probably farmers everywhere like to use their resources. So we've had, lots of discussion and debate about carbon pipelines in the state and around the state. Lots of perspectives on that from our membership for sure. But one thing that I hear a lot when I talk to farmers about that issue is that they would rather use the carbon than see it go underground. And so, with green ammonia, we can hook up with the ethanol plant, use the carbon dioxide to create urea, which is, increasingly being used in our state. And so that's one way that, it's, you like to use what you have and to use the resources, including renewable energy that we can create here in the state. So I think that's another piece that is important here. And then one other thing that I would add, in addition to our grant program, the SAF tax credit, and all the IRA incentives, is that it was just announced this week that Minnesota received a $200 million grant from the EPA's Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program, which is a part of the Inflation Reduction Act. And that is going to be entirely focused on agriculture and food systems, a number of different programs in there, but advanced biofuels is one of them. And so I imagine there will be opportunities to use some of those federal dollars to continue to grow the industry here in Minnesota, because hydrogen is a key input for SAF, and ammonia will help us get to those CI goals. So.
Thanks. I also want to just add quickly that we do have the Department of Economic and Employment Development, and they have developed sort of a small across-departmental group of leaders to really help businesses that are interested in coming to Minnesota, called Minnesota Business First Stop. It's a great way to look at things like site requirements, resources requirements, logistics from rail access to roadway access, just really kind of helping businesses to quickly identify areas that might be of the most advantageous as far as manufacturing and shipping products, and even permitting. So kind of helping folks to get ahead of the curve as far as answering any questions they may have.
Thank you both. And before I jump into my next questions, just to encourage anyone who's listening in to please drop your questions into the chat, and we'll get to them in the next section. But maybe a general question to the group, and from the chairs that you sit in and the perspectives that you have, I'm interested to hear about how collaboration and engagement across the ecosystem is going to be a central aspect of enabling these first projects and the kind of sustainable creation of a market to come into being. It's a theme that I think you all touched on in different ways, but I'd be very interested to see, from your chair specifically, how you feel that kind of collaborative effort around this ecosystem is going to be critical going forward. So if anyone would like to jump in first, and then we can go around the table as preferred. Here,
Sure,
I see you come off mute. Go for it.
We don't even really call it collaboration. It is deploying. I'm looking at our map of our sites right now that we're advancing. Every one of those 78, I guess we have a little bit more than 80 sites, 78 sites on this map. Each one of those requires community support, requires power company support, requires our off-taker, our launch customers, our Landis and Wilbur Ellis, both investors in us, and a mining company. But for us to deploy a system, we need a customer that's willing to pay a price where we can make a fair return. We need a community that wants the system. And the good thing is, it is across the Corn Belt in Minnesota and Iowa and Nebraska and North Dakota and South Dakota. We are getting half of our sites were inbounds, where a farmer or a public utility called us and said, we want you to deploy a system here. And so collaboration is I think collaboration undersells what's required to deploy a site. Dan's building a big system, and the community collaboration and the permitting requirements and everything around that, I can't even begin to fathom, right? If we find an address where a neighbor doesn't want an ammonia system, like, great, we'll move 10 miles down the road and not a problem. But collaboration is absolutely critical for us to deploy a system, because we need a farmer that wants we need a farmer that wants the product. We need a power company that's going to sell us affordable power, and we need a local community that wants to see green ammonia manufacturing in their neighborhood.
Yeah, I'll pick that up. Echo all those things. Like, that, of course, is all needed. And I would add on top that we're transforming markets, right? And we are not starting with a vision of a system that says, how do I make the most money, right? That's clear how you would make the most money, and you would do it the old way. We're starting with a vision of what the system's supposed to look like down the road, which inevitably means you're asking people to make changes, right? And I think a great analogy would be electric cars, right? You can meet very smart, very well-meaning people that say, I don't want an electric car because I don't want to spend all my time charging it, right? Without ever realizing that if they rethink that, it probably means that they will never have to go to a gas station again because they charge at home, right? And so you're trying to get people to change a big system that's been a part of their lives. Fertilizer prices go up and down. Farmers don't like that. Food companies don't like that. But the middlemen that buy and sell fertilizer, they buy and sell without price risk. So if you ask one of them to take a 10-year offtake, they look at you like you're crazy, right? And so it takes all these different levels, whether it's policy, whether it's leadership from some of these top food companies that carry a lot of weight, whether it's leadership from big farmers that kind of have the balance sheet and foresight to, both invest. Ariel, we've got, Washington farmers invested in our project in some of the very first. And so that's important. But it takes all these parts and pieces to, really attack a system that's very big and very ingrained. And so hopefully we can get some of those catalysts going soon where people see that change and then speed up from there.
So I'll push back on one piece of it. We have we have LOIs and offtake agreements from, obviously Landis and Wilbur Ellis, who are our launch customers, but another dozen, all large co-ops. And you're right. Half of them are like, no, like I buy ammonia from Coke and they sell it to me and they tell me what the price is and I pay that price. The other half are like, I never want to do that again. And so if you can offer them an option that is 20 to 30% cheaper than the long-term average of ammonia delivered to them, right? One of the big advantages of modular systems is ammonia is dense, but delivering a ton of ammonia to Africa costs $500 a ton, maybe more, $1,000 a ton. Into Minnesota, probably if you're delivering up from the Gulf Coast, you're probably talking $150. So it's still a material cost. And so if you can locally produce that, on site at a distributor's facility, on site on a farm, and avoid that distribution risk and distribution cost, we found that the majority of big co-ops that we've spoken to and have worked with, they may not buy all their ammonia from us, right? They want diversity of supply, but they can buy a significant chunk of ammonia under long term. We sign 10 to 15-year fixed price contracts.
Yeah, that'll be great. And I hope that all works out. To push back on you a little bit, to say, we don't think using ammonia as fertilizer in 50 years will be a legal thing, right? It's not legal in Europe. It's got downsides that are both environmental and safety risks that, it's been outlawed in most places. So the way we see things moving is that...
Well, it hasn't been outlawed in most places. It's just expensive to deliver into most places, right? The US has ammonia pipelines that allow us to deliver that ammonia into farms at relatively low cost, right? We can, if you're selling urea, $500 or $600, we're going to be, $600, we're going to be half that price in nitrogen cost. Let's also just remember, the average farm has a 5 to 10% operating margin. Fertilizer is 20% of that cost. If you increase your fertilizer cost by 20%, that margin, you are now a money losing farmer. Like, farming's a really hard business. Like, there isn't margin to give, right? Unless we're going to subsidize it more.
And we both agree that you've got to be cost competitive, right? We do it a different way. So that's a given. It's got to be cost competitive.
We just want to be cost competitive today, now, and deliver now.
So in the spirit of that, and it's good to see that in spite of the differing kind of commercial position and propositions that you're both outlining, that there is this alignment on understanding of what the intervention kind of needs to be, and also the collaborative space. I just want to give Ariel, Bryce, Paul the opportunity to jump in on the collaborative piece and how they see it fitting into their work.
Yeah, I'll jump in. As we talked about, we worked in collaboration with a number of partners on promoting this idea at the Minnesota legislature. I think that's a really important piece. But, if we sort of zoom out, something we think a lot about with the energy transition is that it's going to require a lot of rural capacity to create all of this new renewable energy, green chemicals. All these things are going to be developed in rural places, and they're going to start benefit folks in urban places. I live in the city. I have an electric vehicle. I can't take it everywhere because it doesn't have the range I need to get out to farm shops that are 3 hours west and get home again. And we don't have the charging infrastructure yet. So there's an imbalance on who benefits from the energy transition in the next, 5 to 10 years. So something that we think a lot about at Farmers Union is, how do we make sure that the energy transition benefits rural communities? And I think green ammonia offers a really great example of that. And it's very salient with our members that this is a key farm input. It's going to be made here. It's going to be owned by folks in your community, not multinational companies who are giving this, all of the money to their shareholders who are having wonderful summer vacations on their yachts. And that's a really important part of how this is going to benefit not just folks in the city with their EVs who like that charging with renewable energy, but folks across the state. I think, Minnesota is a really big state. It's very northwest. I think it takes 8 hours to drive from the southern border to Canada. And so it will take a long time to really deploy the energy transition across the state. And this is one way that, we can do it now, and that will have really clear benefits. So I think that community collaboration and really thinking about not just who's going to use the green electrons and the sort of outcomes of these things, but who's going to benefit financially and from a community development perspective. And so we'll continue pushing on that.
And just to add on to that, I think really the early adopters will be the ones to see the most benefit. And so, as Ariel and Hero and Dan have all mentioned, that collaboration really is essential, and that moves between our local government legislature body to the actual consumers. You know, farmers will benefit probably the most immediately, but eventually that will ultimately roll out as a feedstock to help with things like green steel, green concrete, maritime fuel. You know, biofuel industries are going to need to support and participate in this as well. We need local and federal government programs to support and incentivize the adoption of these technologies and help reduce the barriers and risks associated with them. You know, and ultimately, we're also trying to come back to the farmer and rural communities through decentralizing a supply chain and manufacturing process that, you know, geopolitically speaking, can be easily disrupted. And we saw that with the, you know, initial price fluctuations with the war in Ukraine. And so I think the more that we can continuously support localized production and decarbonization efforts, the better off we'll all be. Every person and group that collaborates in this will also see benefit.
And from a federal support standpoint, you know, I always tell people that the farmer has a direct line of communication with their representative. Their interests are always going to be looked after, and that's bipartisan. That's Republican and Democrats alike kind of feel the same way when it comes to support for ag country. And so, you know, if we're talking about collaboration, we really need to be developing those relationships with farmers, communicating with them that this is an opportunity, because that percolates up to where we can, you know, guide the U.S. Department of Agriculture in being more prescriptive with an FPEP type program that helps in the proliferation and support for the production of these things that benefit farming community, while also at the same time has that added benefit of lowering emissions.
Great, thank you all. Well, we get to the stage of the webinar where we're going to ask some of the questions that have been placed in the chat. So, or it's a Q&A chat, I should say. So maybe to kick us off, what aspects are most exciting to agricultural cooperatives when it comes to green fertilizers? So maybe Paul or Ariel, I think one of you was speaking to some of the co-op kind of aspects, maybe to kick us off, but any of the others on the panel who'd like to jump in, please do.
I think as far as exciting aspects go, it's really about bringing those dollars back to the community, being able to de-risk the adoption of the process, and also to have just, again, financial security for our communities. As Hiro mentioned earlier, margins can be kind of slim for farmers. And so any way that we can help not only, you know, reduce financial barriers for farmer success, I mean, that comes back to supporting our own food security, our own fuel and energy security. But ultimately, you know, farmers really want to do what is best for their communities, for themselves, for the environment. And this is one way that will really connect all three.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the about half of the ethanol plants in Minnesota are cooperatively owned, and certainly they are thinking about 45Z tax credit, what it means to have low carbon intensity fuels as having value through that tax credit. And then, you know, a variety of other initiatives. Many states, Minnesota included, are exploring clean transportation standards that would have more emphasis on carbon intensity than the current existing low carbon fuel standards. So I think there's the piece that Paul was just talking about. And then I think cooperatives are also seeing that there's likely going to be this market pull for low carbon intensity grains. And, you know, fertilizer is a drop-in replacement that can lower your carbon intensity significantly in one season, rather than, you know, cover crops and low till. Those are really important management practices. It takes a lot of startup capital for that equipment. Management takes a few years to sort of dial in a new system. So it's a little bit harder. We need it all, I think, but green fertilizer is certainly a key strategy in accessing this emerging market for low carbon intensity grains.
Both. Maybe as a follow-on, Ariel, given that you mentioned the tax credit kind of access and availability, and maybe Dan, Hiro, Bryce, this will sit in kind of an area of focus for you all. How central are these tax credit structures for making these projects viable today, and how critical will they be for the sector getting that initial ramp kind of towards a sustainable market coming into being?
Well, I'll answer very quickly, which is that they're very important, and also that we don't have final guidance and rules. Or at least I haven't been tracking all of them. I'm sure folks on this call have more expertise in other areas, but for 45Z, right, we still don't have the rules. That's a big question mark. I think just farmers understand carbon intensity in a different way than soil carbon sequestration and sort of long-term carbon accounting, because it's a number, right? So it's like you have your yield number and you have your CI score, and that's very salient. And so I think if we can get the rules to fit this sort of vision, it can unlock a huge amount of potential. We need the rules. So
yeah, I think when you think about conversions, or when you think about, as Dan was talking, when you're thinking about doing something new, it has to be affordable, and it has to be easy, right? A drop in change in fertilizer, right? For green ammonia, we will lower the CI score by 25 to 30% of corn. It's really simple, and really easily done, and our LCAs are done. And so we are supporting 45Z we are supporting language around 45Z to make sure that, as our co-ops often remind us, we want to make sure that our farmers get paid for that credit and not just the rest of the supply chain, right? And that has always been a point of conflict, where, right, if you're willing to give $1 of credit, who gets paid for that? And it's really important for us to see that the farmers get at least a chunk of that. Right, they're the ones growing. They're the ones where we're using their land to grow these grains. And right now, the way 45Z is written, it's unclear exactly how that's going to work. I will mention, for us, 45V, the hydrogen manufacturing tax credit, is what we're really focused on. We are working with some of the large ethanol companies, including a couple of the independent ones. One of them in Minnesota, I think, focused on 45Z language to make sure farmers do get paid for that. I think one thing, Pat, I also wanted to go back to, when we think about what's exciting, the other thing about green ammonia, or the other thing about green fertilizers, is this require an incredible amount of capital investment, billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars of capital investment across the world. For us, we started by thinking about that as an opportunity to economically invest in farms in sub-Saharan Africa to improve to tackle food security issues there. It's the same thing in rural America. We can deploy systems. We can deploy a green fertilizer system into rural Minnesota to invest millions of dollars into that community, which has a century or centuries long history of farming.
Yeah, and I would add, it depends on the jurisdiction and the place and the time, and lots of factors. Our first project as a company was in Brazil, and that project is still moving quickly and is going well, but it hasn't kept up with the US plant. So in Brazil, electricity is cheaper and construction is cheaper and fertilizers priced differently. In the US, where we're building PGF, it is more expensive to build. It is more expensive electricity, but we have these tax credits that come in to make that support. And so I think it's great legislation from the US administration. I hope they finalize their rules soon so that those of us who are ready to build can build with certainty. Yeah, it's been really important for, I think, making the US a leader on this topic. And it's going to be great for farmers who are going to get, honestly, first access to these low carbon products, and will be advantaged on a global stage when they are trading and selling these commodities to global companies. So,
Bryce, have you any reflections from the federal landscape, given how often you're engaged on it?
Yeah, no, I think that, I can't speak to the intricacies of the tax credits. That's for my hydrogen team and biofuels team. But I think we are looking for, as I mentioned before, more prescriptive engagement from USDA's ability to, or the federal level to support this kind of deployment, production, aspect of ammonia. So putting a plug out there, you know, as we are in the beginning stages of this work here at Breakthrough Energy, we are constantly looking for and supporting partnerships. So would love to do some follow-up after this just to see what though that engagement can look like and that policy development can look like.
Right. Well, we are 1 minute from the top of the hour, so I'd like to just thank you all for your time, for sharing your expertise and your perspectives on what is an incredibly exciting emerging space. I think the opportunity is abundantly clear to everybody who's heard you speak over the last hour. And there is an awful lot of work ahead of us in moving this space and sector forward. And that is a collaborative engagement, and appreciating that collaborative may not be the word that fully encompasses the level of engagement and challenge that we face, but nonetheless, the opportunity is very tangible, very real. So thank you all for sharing your perspectives and your expertise. I would just like to finally just plug that, we have launched this report looking at Minnesota's particularly and the potential for the sector. We will be sending a follow-up email with a link to that report, and also please feel free to reach out if you've any follow-on questions or you have any interest in this space. We're going to continue to be working on it with some of the wonderful folks that we've had on, as well as many other people across the globe at this point. So just to thank you all again for joining us, and to look out for that publication, and please reach out if you have any questions or follow-ups. But thank you all, and thank you very much, especially to our panelists today.